Up next is one of the classiest TV journalists of our generation. His career straddles print, television, books, and now new media. He was the editor of the Hindustan Times. He's a very well-known food critic and has authored many books. And some of his books have won the prestigious Cointreau Award for the best food literature in the world. Who are we talking about? Let's welcome Mr. Vir Sanghvi.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. My being here after all these distinguished speakers is something of an accident. I was at dinner 3 weeks ago with the Davids, and they told me about this conference, and they said it was about wellness. And I said, I have no idea about anything to do with wellness, and they said intellectual wellness. And this was, I thought, a little dodgy because A, nobody's ever called me an intellectual, and B, intellectuals are not actually known for wellness, right? Because we're generally fat, overweight, not terribly interested in being fit. So it seemed like an odd fit. And there was another problem, which was, as they will probably tell you, I was at that stage not walking, I had a very bad back condition, and I realized that they wanted to do that whole Steve Jobs number where you sort of walk around on stage, which is a problem for me. So forgive me if I'm not going to be that mobile. About intellectual wellness, well, what is intellectual wellness? It's pretty much the same thing you've heard today. Almost everyone you've heard today talking about wellness has said in their own way, from their own fields, roughly the same thing. They've said wellness is about balance within your mind, within your body, within your life. In a purely medical sense, if you have bacteria, viruses within your body, you're not well. In a financial sense, if you're always worrying about how you're going to make money, how you're going to eke out a living, you're not well. If you're in an emotional sense, constantly unhappy, insecure, you're not well. So it's basically the same thing. How does intellectual wellness fit into it? And what is intellectual wellness anyhow, right? So I thought about this, and it's very hard for a journalist to talk about this because at the moment, I think in public esteem, journalists are slightly below politicians. We're not that much higher. And, well, a lot below politicians. Everybody's a lot below politicians, but only below politicians, nothing else. But I'll tell you what I think intellectual wellness is about. Intellectual wellness is about cleanliness, simplicity, straightforwardness in how you think. If you look at the world today, there is a complete absence of reason, a complete absence of any kind of intellectual straightforwardness or rigidity. What you have is an overdose of hatred, an overdose of prejudice. If you were to look at, say, the United States, the most advanced country in the world, and you were to look at the Donald Trump candidacy, what is it based on? It's not based on intellectualism. If anything, its basis is anti-intellectualism. It's not about wellness, it's about sickness. The people who support Trump listen to the most hateful things he says about Mexicans, about Muslims, sort of tacit suggestions, maybe jokes that people who support gun rights should go and kill Hillary Clinton. And yet, within a substantial section of the population, though thank God he appears to be in meltdown at the moment, people appreciate that. This is what the most powerful country the world history has ever thrown us. And yet, the man who could be elected, one of two people, is essentially a lunatic. He appeals to prejudice, he appeals to hatred. And it works. He's got up there. Look at the UK, supposedly, again, a very educated country. Look at the Brexit vote, which some of you may know about. What was it based on? It was based essentially on a feeling that we should leave the EU, not because they understood what the European Union was about, but because there was prejudice against Eastern Europeans, Europeans coming into the country. And look at our own country. Look at India. I mean, what is intellectual wellness in India? Well, a great absence. Because essentially we've become a country where any kind of idea, any kind of issue is always taken down to the lowest common denominator. We no longer discuss facts. We no longer discuss issues. All we do is fight. Everything is at the level of personal abuse. It's at the level of sloganeering. And yeah, I take some responsibility for this because I'm a journalist. I don't know how many of you watch the nightly news shows on Indian television. And that's a peculiar Indian phenomenon. If you watch, say, CNN, you watch BBC, people will report the news. There will be debates, but they will be on issues. There will be stories. They'll tell you what's happening in the world. You forget about that and turn to the Indian news channels. And what you will see usually is one guy, an anchor sitting in a studio, maybe two guys, a girl, on either side of him, several people in postage stamp-sized little things, windows we call them in the trade, and then they will try and make a point. And as they've sort of got two sentences into the point, somebody will interrupt them. Then as that guy has got two sentences into the point, the third window will explode and somebody will abuse them. And when all that is over, the anchor will interrupt and abuse them all. That is essentially intellectual discourse in India. So no matter what issue you're talking about, it's always reduced to this level. It's always reduced to a level that's about persons, that's loud, that's aggressive, that's about prejudice. If you were, say, today, or yesterday, the Chief Justice of India made a statement in court in which he blamed the government because he said there weren't enough judges being appointed. I don't know if any of you have ever tried to go to an Indian court or filed a case or tried to get any kind of justice. It is impossible for the ordinary person in this country to get any justice. You file a case, it takes 6 to 7 years for the case to even come to any kind of conclusion. In those 6 to 7 years, the judge will be transferred thrice. And you will have to start again with a new judge each time. At the end of that process, say you've been cheated out of your house, and you want to get your house back, you'll get your house back in theory, because no sooner has that happened than they will go and appeal. That will take another 7 years, and so on. Now, the only people who get rich out of this are lawyers. There are lawyers who I know personally who charge for appearing in court, and this is a true story, just for appearing for one day, 1 crore of rupees. Yeah, that's the kind of money lawyers make in this country. I don't grudge them the money. People are willing to pay it, so why shouldn't they take it? But isn't there something essentially wrong with the system where you and I will get no justice? We will get nothing remotely resembling justice, and yet many people, the judges will have a good time, the lawyers will get rich, everybody will feed off the system except for the people that system is supposed to benefit. Will you see a discussion on that on Indian television? Will you see somebody doing a story explaining to you why this should be so? Will you see someone putting pressure on the government to try and change that? Except perhaps for the Chief Justice, who was so upset in the Supreme Court that he exploded. You won't. What will you see? You will see 8 windows. You will see one guy saying it is the Congress that did it. You will see another guy saying it's the BJP that did it. You will see a third guy saying, no, Arvind Kejriwal will make all of this all right, and all of you are wrong. Then the Congress guy will say, well, the BJP has been in power for 2 years. And the BJP guy will say, what happened in the 2G scam anyhow? You guys are all crooks. And then the DMK guy will say, well, we were framed, and so on. That is pretty much how intellectual discourse in India is conducted. If you listen to election campaign rallies, I don't know that much about Tamil Nadu, I imagine it's the same. But certainly if you listen to them in the north, there was a time when politicians used to come and say, I will give you this if I'm elected, I will give you that if I'm elected. They no longer do that. What they actually do is they get up there and they abuse their opponents. They say, so-and-so should have done this, but he's a crook, he didn't do this. So-and-so should have done this, but he's a fool, he didn't do this. Yeah? If you listen to what the Congress says about Narendra Modi, it's nearly always abusive. If you listen to what Narendra Modi said about the Congress, he said about Rahul Gandhi during the election campaign, memorably, that the man is an idiot, he wouldn't get a job as a driver if he wasn't the son of Sonia Gandhi. Now, you may agree with him, you may not agree with him, but the point is you cannot conduct politics at that level. There should be some kind of discourse. The problem with the world, generally, is that we don't have intellectual wellness. What we have is intellectual sickness. Nothing is done at an elevated level. Nothing is done at the level of ideas. Almost all our discussions are based on prejudice. Let's take another example. There are a fair number of armed forces people in this room, people who've given their lives, who actually were willing to sacrifice their lives. They all know people who sacrificed their lives, and they did it in conflicts with our neighbors, with Pakistan perhaps, some of them with the IPKF and the Tamil Tigers, whatever. But the point is, these are people who know what they're talking about. And when you talk to them about war, when you talk to them about the enemy, they talk rationally and reasonably because they know that sometimes you have to fight. Sometimes you have to give your life for your country. But war is not a good thing. People die. You lose your father, you lose your son, you lose your brother, and the other side, they lose their. So these people will always talk about conflict in sober, restrained terms. When the time comes, they'll go out and maybe give their lives, maybe get killed, maybe get wounded, maybe see their comrades and brothers shot down next to them. But they're sensible. Now turn on to television. Read the newspapers. See the level at which television anchors, journalists are encouraging us every single day to go to war with Pakistan. The slightest incident, and they say, it's time for us to attack, we can't take this any longer. And then there's this other scam, I don't know if you've noticed this, which is that on many television channels, I think all television channels, there are always 2-3 Pakistani guests. They're done on a satellite link. And they come on, and first the anchor abuses them, then the other guests abuse them. And then you think, why are these people being humiliated so much? And you feel a little bad for them. But they come back the next day, and then they're humiliated and they're abused. The reason they do it, apparently, is because they're paid $500 in appearance, and it's good money. But that is, I think, an indication of the level to which our intellectual discourse has sunk. I've been in TV studios on channels where there are these violent and vicious debates. And you only see these guys fighting with each other. You don't see them in the breaks. In the breaks, they're nudging each other, they're laughing, they're joking, they're discussing how they'll meet for lunch tomorrow or whatever. As far as they're concerned, it's just a performance. Right? And it's easy to make fun of television channels or journalists, but we're to blame. The reality is that this kind of conflict, this kind of prejudice, it sells. The more you simplify things, the more you take complex issues, reduce them to the lowest common denominator, the more you have fights on camera or pretend that everybody there is a television warrior, it works. You get higher ratings. If you run a newspaper and you run these very sensational stories, say, against one community, against your neighbor, abusing people, accusing them of crimes that they haven't really committed and which you can't really prove, your circulation goes up. So when we talk about intellectual wellness, what we are seeing in the world, whether it's Brexit, whether it's Trump, whether it's Indian journalism, are all symptoms of the same thing. What we are seeing in the world is a crisis of intellectual wellness. We are not, let's put it bluntly, as a society, as Earth, as a collection of societies, intellectually well. We are in deep, deep trouble intellectually. So what are we going to do about it? I don't know. I see a lot of young people over there. My generation, let's face it, has screwed it up. The future ultimately lies with you guys. Maybe you'll find a solution. Maybe things will change. I don't know. You guys take it forward. Thank you very much.